Hello everyone, welcome back to a new video. In this video, we are going to talk about container runtimes, what container runtime is, what does it actually do, what it doesn't do, how is it different than container engine, and a few more important things. So let's get started. First of all, what is container runtime? As the name suggests, it is software that is used to run containers in your local machine. So whenever you type in a command like docker run nginx, then the container runtime is what actually pulls the images, stores the images, and actually runs the images. Now, how that happens, let's talk about that. I have written it down somewhere. Yep. So this is the thing what happens when you run docker run nginx. We'll not talk about the engine part here. So imagine that the image is already present in your machine as of now. And if you have watched the previous video about Docker images and Docker containers, or actually images and containers, then you would know that these images are actually layers that are stacked on top of each other. And that is how they are saved in the disk as well. So what the container runtime would do in this case is it will first unpack the image layers for that particular container that we are going to run, and it will create this file system called rootfs, and it will unpack all these image layers into rootfs. Why are we doing this? We are doing this so that our process or our container that we are going to create will have this as the root directory. So in the root directory of our container, you will see all the things that we had in our container images or the image layers. So this will include your application code, your binaries, your libraries, packages, runtimes, whatever was there in your container images. Then the step two is to run a new Linux process. So this is taken care of by the lower level container runtime. There are two sort of types of container runtimes. One is high level, one is low level. We'll talk about that later, but think of it as the container runtime itself. So firstly, the container runtime created this rootfs file system. It has not attached anything. It has just created it as of now. Now it will create a new Linux process because containers run as Linux processes. So we have created a new Linux process. Now we are going to create a new namespace for that process. Why? Because that is the point of container, that it gives you isolated environment where you can run your application. So a namespace for isolation, and then it will attach the Cgroups to the process. Why? Because we would want to talk to the kernel. The container would want to talk to the kernel for resources. So that is why we attach Cgroups. And then we will set the rootfs as the project's file system or processes file system. So now our process is perfectly ready. Our container is in a form of a process which is completely ready. It has its own namespace, it has its Cgroups attached, and it has the rootfs that we created attached to it. So now the process actually has your code as well. And now we can simply run that Linux process. So this is how, or this is what happens, or this is what the container runtime does when you try to run a container. So this is what container runtimes do. They create containers, they can stop containers, they can delete and clean up containers, and that's it. That is all that container runtime does. Now building of images, creation of networks for containers, all those things are taken care of by the engine itself. That is not something container runtime does. Container runtime is only responsible for the running of the containers, stopping of containers, etc. So I think I've written it down as well. Yes, so this is what container runtime does. It creates a container process. Like we discussed about this, rootfs, it sets up, it creates the namespace, attaches Cgroups, etc. So it can do that. So it can create a container process, it can delete a container process, and it can stop a container process. This is all that container runtime does. container runtime does not build images. It does not pull images from the registries. Actually, it does technically pull images, but it does not talk to the registry. That is taken care of by the engine itself. And it does not create or manage networks between containers. Now let's see how it actually works under the hood. So let us say this is the thing. We are going to run this docker run nginx command, and this nginx image is not present locally. So what happens in this case is you have typed this docker run nginx command. So the docker CLI will go and talk to the docker engine, and it'll tell, okay, we are going to run this nginx image now. Now the docker engine, what it does is it will tell the container D, which is our high level runtime, like I said. So firstly, docker engine will say, do we have this image locally? And it will find out, okay, we do not have this image locally. So docker engine tells container D that we don't have this image locally. Please pull this image from the registry and store it somewhere. So that is why I said that technically the container runtime can pull images, but it does need the assistance of Docker engine to tell, okay, this is what you need to do. This is the registry you need to look at and pull the image from. So now what container D does is it will pull the image, it will store the image in form of layers in the disk, and it will unpack the images or unpack the image layers into this rootfs directory or the file system that we talked about earlier. Now, why is this called high level runtime and this is the low level runtime? Basically, what happens is the high level runtimes are those runtimes or those container runtimes that take care of the broader life cycle of the container. But what actually talks to kernel is the low level runtime. So high level runtime, basically, they just take care of the life cycle of the container, and under the hood they are talking to the low level runtime itself. So in case of container D, what it does is it can unpack image layers, it can pull and store images, and it can manage the state. By that I mean, if we want to run a container, we'll say the container D will actually talk to runc. It will only take care of the state, and the actual work is being done by runc itself. So the higher level runtime is actually just managing the state, is actually managing the life cycle of the container, and low level runtime is the one that talks to the kernel, and then it attaches the Cgroups, it sets up the namespaces, it creates the process that will be the container, and this container D or the high level runtime creates that rootfs, but the low level runtime attaches that rootfs to the container or the process. So where were we actually? Okay, let's start again. That okay, we typed docker run nginx. Docker engine said, okay, this is not there locally, this is not present locally. Container D, please pull this from this registry. Container D goes, pulls it from Docker Hub in this case, let's say, and it unpacks all the image layers. It actually firstly pulls the image, stores the image layers in the disk. If you don't know why are we doing it in form of layers and why are we storing layers in the disk, then there's already a video where we talked about this, so you can go check that out. But yeah, it will pull the image and it will store the image in the disk, and then since we want to just not just pull the image, we also want to run the image, so it will start running the image. By that, what it means is it will unpack the image layers and it will create this rootfs file system. Now this container D will talk to runc and tell, okay, we are going to run this container, please create a process and do other things for this container. So runc will go and it will talk to the kernel, it will create a process, then it will set up a namespace, then it will attach the Cgroups for that particular process, and then it will say that, okay, the rootfs that we created here, we are going to attach that as the processes file system. And once that is done, you can just run the process and the container will be running. So that is what happens under the hood when you try to run a container. So that is basically it. That is what container runtime is. that is what it does. Like I said, like we talked about, it runs the container, but it is not responsible for anything else. Other things are taken care of by the engine itself. One more thing I would like to talk about before we wind up this would be, we talked about how to create or how to run the container. What happens when we try to stop the container? So if we do Docker, or actually Docker this way, we zoom in a little, stop, and then the container name. What happens in this case? So what happens is, first of all, we don't have to do anything fancy over here. We already have this container as a process running in Linux. And we know if we want to end a process, what we can do is we can simply send a term signal telling that, okay, we want this process to be shut down and to be cleaned up. So what we will do is we will say, we will, or actually Docker will, why would we do that? Docker will So what happens is Docker will send this term signal to the process that is actually running in the container. Now a container can have multiple processes. So in that case, it will send it to the main process. So now what happens is the process will be trying to shut down gracefully all the current requests that we have already started processing. Those will be completed. Database connections, if there are any, those will be closed and it will exit cleanly. Now what happens is, if this, for example, this takes a lot of time. If this is going to take a lot of time, that is a problem. So in that case, Docker actually sends another signal called kill after 10 seconds. So this is sort of a timeout of 10 seconds in which the process or the main process of the container is requested to just gracefully shut down. If it cannot do it within 10 minutes, or sorry, 10 seconds, which is a default number, you can configure that. If it does not do that, then we will send a kill signal and it will shut down not gracefully or non-gracefully. So what this kill signal does is it forcefully kills the process. And once this is completed, the container is gone. The container is no more running. So this is how the stopping of container works. Let's go back to this part. So I think we have covered everything about container runtimes. Now, like we discussed about Docker already, in case of Docker, the Docker engine talks to the container D runtime, and the container D runtime talks to the runc runtime. So this is the higher level runtime, this is the lower level runtime in case of Docker. If you are wondering what Kubernetes uses by default as container runtime, it's the same, container D as the higher level runtime and runc as the lower level runtime. Obviously, there will be no Docker engine. So in that case, it uses this interface or CRI, container runtime interface, to talk to the container runtimes. So in that case, it looks like Kubernetes, which talks to CRI, which talks to the container D, which talks to runc, or you can use cryo as well. So in that case, it will be like Kubernetes, which talks to cryo, and cryo talks to runc directly. So I hope you were able to understand what container runtime is and how they work. I hope this video was useful. If you want to watch more such videos, you can check out the channel. In either case, thank you for watching this one, and I'll see you guys in the next one.